So I'm very happy to introduce Miss Anne Lister of Shipton Hall in Yorkshire, England to you tonight, who was a great diarist. She wrote one of the longest diaries that exist in the English language, and she was a great lover. In this diary, she wrote about the many lesbian love affairs she had in her life. And she was as well a great traveler. And that's why she died here in Georgia in September 1840. And this is why I am here. I am her biographer. I'm currently writing a biography on Anne Lister, and I'm tracing her last steps here in Georgia. So I am presenting work in progress to you, and after I have presented something to you, an outline of a biography, and I will concentrate on the months in Georgia, then I would love to start a discussion with you and also gain new insights from you, because I have some open research questions and I would love to discuss some topics with you. I'm very grateful to the Heinrich Boell Foundation as well as to Women's Fund for the invitation to this talk, so that I can talk with a Georgian audience about a bit crazy English traveler who died in your country. I have given you this handout so that you might more easily follow Anne Lister's biography. You don't need it, but you might find it helpful. Anne Lister was born in April 1791 as the first child of Jeremy Lister and his wife Rebecca Battle. She grew up with 5 younger siblings, 4 brothers among them, but all of them died. So when she was an adult, she had only her baby sister Marian. From early on, Anne Lister was called an unmanageable tomboy, giving us a rough idea how she was like as a child. So from the beginning on, she was not a girlish girl. Together with her younger brothers, who were then still alive, she had tutorials in Latin and Greek and arithmetics. So compared to other girls of her age, she had a rather good education. She was a noble woman, but not so noble. Her father, Jeremy, was the 3rd son of a family, meaning all the bulk of the heritage and the family seat, Shipton Hall, belonged to her uncle James, the eldest brother, and not to her father, Jeremy. So she was noble, and there was only enough money not to have to work. So in 1805 and 6, she went for 1 year to a school, the Manor School in York, and this is where she had her first love affair with a girl named Eliza Rain. She might have even been expelled from school because the teachers got to know about that love affair. These 2 girls shared a room together, but this is no safe information. The safest information we have as next is that when Eliza Rain and Anne Lister were separated again, Eliza was still in school, Anne Lister not, they started to write to each other. This is, for example, an example of a letter from young Anne Lister to young Eliza Rain. These were love letters, and the girls had to make sure that not a curious mother would find them. So they did not speak openly in these letters, open enough for them, but they wanted to make sure that no one else would read them. And in England, in the very early 19th century, a correspondence was quite unsafe. So And Lister started in very early, in this 1807, a list of the letters written to Eliza Reign. And this is the beginning of the later so famous diary. So she made a list, which letter have I written and which did I get. And this is the beginning, so to make sure that no letter got lost. And this is the beginning of a diary which, as I told you, would at the end of her life be one of the longest that has ever been written in the English language. Back. From this list, she turned to writing a bit more about her everyday life, and also about when meeting Eliza, about their sex life, and about other taboos in her life that were most of all clothing, her menstruation, and always money. And she wanted to hide information she wanted to write in the diary in a way that no one could understand her. And that was why she, from early on, she experimented with her so-called crypt hand. That means she invented a private alphabet which no one else could read, in order to make sure that she could, in her diary, write as openly as possible, and hiding it not anywhere behind her pillow or something like that, but hiding it in the scripture. And I hope you can see the difference. For example, in the first paragraph is written in her plain hand. It should be a readable English text. It's very hard to read, I admit. But then comes at the end, here, the first example of the crypt hand. And she experimented with Greek letters. I told you she learned Greek. She was quite a scholar in Greek. And arithmetical signs. And she so made a mixture which she developed over a couple of years until it was perfect. And she was able to read and write both plain hand and crypt hand as in the same speed. It was to her no problem. Eliza Reign soon was not the only love in Anne Lister's life, and this is the way she continued for the rest of her life. Sometimes, while doing my research, I had to make a list of my own with how many women she was together at the very same time. While she was still with Eliza Reign, there came Isabella Norcliffe, who stayed a very long a lifetime friend and a long-time lover. But the love of her life was a girl named Mariana Belcom. Unfortunately, we don't have a portrait from her, but we might imagine her to be very pretty, because this is what Anne Lister writes very often in her diary. And you see they were lovers from 1813 until 1832. That's quite a stretch of time. They both dreamed of living together, but that was not that easy possible. Sorry. But with Mariana Belcom was the love of her life, and sexually she was the woman she was most intrigued with. It needed her 20 years, so to say, to get over her. And I give you an example of how Anne Lister, in these crypt passages, not exactly these, this is only an example, how she would talk and write about her love. It was, she thought also about her being, in our words, lesbian. And she wrote about it, "My conduct and feeling being surely natural to me, inasmuch as they were not taught, not fictitious, but instinctive. I had always had the same turn from infancy. I had never varied, and no effort on my part had been able to counteract it. The girls liked me, and had always liked me, and I had never been refused by anyone. I can't help saying. So she always argued with nature, that she said, as in this quotation, my desire is natural to me. And I am God's creation, and if God created me like this, it's fine. So she never had a kind of lesbian self-hatred or something like that. She was very happy with being who she was. She was a very strong personality and had no self-doubt whatsoever, and especially not in this very sensitive phase of her life. Now these are these two strong desires in her life, to write a diary and to write really a chronic of her life, as well as to express her lesbian desire and what she did with the girls. She had many euphemisms and ways of describing sexual intercourse with other women, and this is what makes her diary unique. And unique in a way, I think one can say worldwide. These documents have become, in the meantime, world document heritage from the UNESCO, as an example how unique they are. And so now, from encounters with this Mariana Belcom, the love of her life, as I told you, she writes, for example, 2 good kisses at once last night and 3 this morning after 8. Kiss is the classical euphemism in English, French, German literature when you want to talk about sex in the 18th and 19th century. Poets always kiss, they never... I'm sorry, this is adult content, yes? They kiss, they don't fuck. Up until the late 20th century, when they could speak open about these topics. So, kiss was the central euphemism and Lister used. And it was, as you know, a kiss is the abbreviation of kiss in the English language is an X. So if you end your letter with 3 X's, it means kisses. She had a private cipher for herself in her diaries. When she marked an X at the side of one page, it meant masturbation. So she had a kiss with herself. Another example of an encounter with Mariana Belcom. We drew close together, made love, and had one of the most delightfully long, tender kiss we ever had. Or another one, 2 last night. Mariana spoke in the very act. Ah, said she, can you ever love anyone else? She knows how to heighten the pleasure of our intercourse. She often murmurs, oh, how delicious. Just at the very moment, meaning at orgasm. All her kisses are good ones. So, while in comparison, you remember there was this other Isabella Norcliffe with whom Anne Lister was together at the very same time. They have a wonderful quotation, Isabella was dry as a stick. You see how daring this language is. This is a woman of the early 19th century is talking not only about sex, she's talking about lesbian sex, and she is so outspoken and in times even pornographic that you could not even think about it. In these times, for example, in German philosophy, philosophers declared the essence of women as being without desire. Women knew only one desire, that was to please her husband. Woman herself felt no desire. Sorry, welcome. There's more seat there? Okay. For a good ordinary woman, she felt no sexual needs. For sure, this was philosophical rhetoric, and it's written in the books, and I'm sure that women of these days had their private smiles themselves, as well as had happily married couples. But this, to us today, nonsense talk about the desireless woman was the main discourse of the time. And we have to think that we, even today, at least our mothers, but I feel it from myself, are still children of this very powerful discourse which stretched all over the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, and of which we still today have to get rid of. So Anne Lister's unique diary, with this unique language about the sexual needs of the woman, is a very strong, let's say, put it like text, to get a complete other idea, not what men thought about women in the early 19th century, but what they thought about themselves. So it's not only a private document on Anne Lister's sexual needs, it's a very political, for us today, a very political statement of women's lives and what was possible and what not. The love of her life, Mariana Belcom, really loved Anne Lister too, but she had no future with her. As I told you, Anne Lister was not rich and she could not offer her a life. So Mariana Belcom in 1816 married a rich widower named Charles Lawton, and both women had a deep crisis, but they thought, okay, this guy is old and he won't survive the next 10 years, and then we take his money and live together. And Lister even accompanied them to their honeymoon, and she succeeded in betraying the husband and having sex with his wife while he was snoring in the next room. She even betrayed Mariana Belcom because at the very same vacation she had sex with her sister as well. So from time to time it's really difficult to count all these things, what she was going on, but thanks to her diaries we know our way through her adventurous love and sex life. In 1815, Anne Lister's uncle James died, and this was a major change in her personal life, because as all her brothers had died, it was her who inherited Shipton Hall. This is the house. It's still existing in Halifax in Yorkshire in England. Suzette did this photo when we were visiting Shipton Hall. This is a very old country house. It dates back to the 13th century, but it's not a castle. Although it looks quite nice today, she always, Anne Lister always wanted it to be a bigger house. She thought of Warwick Castle or Balmoral or things like that we have seen in pictures. But actually it was a quite modest house. In her days it was even more modest, because this tower here and this part were built later in life by Anne Lister. I will tell you about that later on. So now she was mistress of Shipton Hall, and she had an income. She had a better income than before, but she was still not rich, but she was able to live on her own. She did never have to work. She had servants, but her money was not enough for her aspirations. And so from now on, she dreamt of meeting a noble and very rich woman who would marry her and who would give her more rank in life and more money to fulfill all her dreams. So to make Shipton Hall bigger and to travel throughout the world, yes, and to have a wife at her elbow. That was her expression. Because she had in the meantime given up Mariana Belcom as the partner of her life. She continued to have sex with her, but while Mariana still was dreaming of living with Anne Lister, Anne Lister did not share that dream any longer. And she went looking for more ambitious wives on the continent. In the meantime, she had loved to travel. She started in England and Wales, in her home country, with smaller and then bigger and bigger excursions. And she was always fond of walking. She was a walking person. Although a noble woman, she thought she should ride, but horses were not, she did not have an inclination to horses. She was really a very, very good walker. So a stride of 30 kilometers a day was no problem to her. And she enjoyed walking in the Lake District tremendously. And now, as mistress of Shipton Hall and with more money than before, she started traveling on the continent. I leave out the details. You have it in the handout. By the years, she really traveled throughout Europe and did some serious hiking in the Alps as well as in the Pyrenees. But her main goal in the years in which she spent in Paris was to get this rich, noble woman. But alas, she did not succeed. Although she was very charming and attracted women all over. I gave you in the handout, I gave you more names of women she was in love with, and they were in love with her. The one rich noble woman who would marry her, she would not found. So in 1832, she came back to Shipton Hall and looked around who was left. And she realized that she had a young neighbor called Anne Walker. I'm sorry that this woman also is called Anne. We have quite a lot of Annes in Anne Lister's biography, so I will try always to tell this Anne, the Anne Walker, because finally she was the woman who married Anne Lister in a way. But not from the beginning, because Anne Lister successfully seduced Anne Walker, but Anne Walker was not stupid. She was a rich heiress. She was not noble, but she wanted to amuse herself with Anne Lister and liked being courted, but almost literally after the first kiss, Anne Lister told her, now we make testaments and you give me your money. Anne Walker was not that stupid, and she refused. And so they had a love affair for a couple of months, But Anne Walker would not relent, would not pass over all her money to Anne Lister, and so they quit again. In 1833, Anne Lister again travelled on the continent and only came back when her aunt, another Anne, was said to be dying. Actually, in this year, she already wanted to go to Russia and further on, but she had to postpone this big voyage because of this sick aunt. So she came back, and in the meantime, this Anne Walker had realized that she missed Anne Lister a lot when Anne Lister was on the continent again. And so they started anew, and already so, I think shortly before Christmas in 1833, Anne Lister came back to Shipton Hall, and already to New Year's Eve, Anne Walker invited her over. Anne Walker lived for her own, so she had no family to take care of or to hide away from, and things became clear. On February 10th, 1834, they both thought of their wedding day. Again, Anne Lister said, now we have to make testaments, and you give me yours and I give you mine, which was quite unjust because what Anne Lister had to give was not much, and what Anne Walker had to give was much more. And they quarreled a lot about that. And it took Anne Lister 3 years of convincing Anne Walker until they finally made testaments in 1837, so that both agreed, when I die, all my money and Shipton Hall and so on gets to the other and not. So for sure they never legally could marry each other as two women, but when it comes to property, they really found a way, a legal way to secure, so to say, the widow. That was not enough for Anne Lister. As I told you, she was very ambitious and she wanted money now. And she really felt as the husband of Anne Walker, and as a heterosexual husband in these days would have got all the money of his wife at his own disposal. And that was Anne Lister's aim as well. Anne Walker was reluctant about that, and they quarreled a lot, but over the weeks and months and years, Anne Lister succeeded to get more and more of Anne Walker's money, with which she rebuilt Shipton Hall, the tower and so on. She made a big landscape garden, which you can still visit today, which is very beautiful. And she invested into coal pits. On Shipton Hall, and the whole of Yorkshire is full of coals. And so with Anne Walker's money, she'd dig coal pits and invested in coal. She invested in a hotel, which she built, and so on. So with Anne Walker's money, she tried to become a businesswoman in order to get even more money and to finally be that rich woman she always dreamt to be. Anne Lister and Anne Walker were surprisingly out, in our terms, to Halifax society in these years. Anne Lister always was known in Halifax as being a peculiar personality. She herself called herself odd when it comes to her, what we would say, lesbian butch-like personality. Also Halifax society called her odd and spoke about her oddities. To these oddities belonged the fact that she always wore black. Clothing was a very sensitive matter to her. She never wore trousers. That was the border she would not cross. But she also wanted to avoid proper female clothing. For example, the bonnets that women were expected to wear in these years, meaning these hats that had this form, yes, which really made the woman not to see right or left. She had to turn her head. And Lister always refused this as too female. So she wore a hat, which was also not a man's hat, but which was so curious that people who saw her, whoops, would look after her. And when she was wearing this hat in Paris, she even created a carriage accident, because the carriage driver also, whoops, had to watch out and made an accident with the horses. So I gave you the date, in 1817 she decided that the proper way of expressing her personality in clothing is woman's dress, but always black. Black was not a color to be worn by unmarried women in these years. Black was the color strict, reserved for mourning and for traveling gentlemen. And this is the picture she wanted to give of herself, this traveling noble gentleman. When he was on horseback, he would travel in black. Lord Byron, the poet, always wore black, and so she wanted to give herself the aura of this gentleman in black. So in Halifax, and Lister was known as a peculiar personality with this dress thing she had, and it was known that she had only women as close friends. She even would tell Halifax society that she would never marry, and people knew that there never was any man in Anne Lister's life. It was the good society who knew, but it was also the common people who knew. And from time to time she had some bad encounters on the street. Men who felt provoked by her would try to hit her. Once maybe even tried to rape her, but she escaped. And at another situation, I have a quotation. The people generally remark, as I pass along, how much I am like a man. At the top of Canary Lane, as I went, 3 men said, as usual, "That's a man." And one said, "Does your cock stand?" Another example of the outspoken and daring and even obscene language that Anne Lister wrote in her diary. So Halifax society was not really surprised when finally Anne Walker moved in to Shipton Hall, and they never said we are a couple and have sex to anybody, but people thought for themselves. The most obvious sign they could do, except for moving together, was that they rented a church pew together. In these days, you rented the bench where you sat in church. In England, you rented, and you called this a church pew. And Anne Lister and Anne Walker rented such a pew together in the first row of the church. So when they were in service, everybody could see that these 2 women belonged together. A couple of months after Anne Walker moved in with Anne Lister, in Yorkshire newspapers, in several Yorkshire newspapers, there were mock marriage announcements announcing that Captain Tom Lister of Shipton Hall had married Anne Walker. This is another very interesting example for us, that Anne Lister was called Captain Tom. So today we still have the word of the tomboy, meaning a boyish girl who might turn out to be a lesbian when she's grown up. So Tom and Tommy is obviously a very early example in the English language, another euphemism to describe a lesbian woman. The word lesbian did not exist in these days. So, together with Anne Walker, Anne Lister traveled a lot through Europe. Anne Walker was not well traveled in these days. So it was only with Anne Lister that she came to visit the continent for the first time. They went to Switzerland, to Paris, to Brussels, and so on. I don't go into details. Their relationship was not a very happy one, because Anne Walker always felt that Anne Lister never had been crazy for her. Actually, compared to other relationships with women Anne Lister had, this one, the final one, the woman she married, was not a big love of her life. This is very open and outspoken in her diaries. It was the money and being so easy to seduce this neighboress. And Anne Walker felt all this, although Anne Lister never would tell her. By the way, Anne Lister never told any woman that there had been women before. One of the tricks Anne Lister used to seduce a woman was to tell her, well, you raise strange feelings in me I have never felt before. And so she told every girl that she was the first, and she really tried very hard to make them believe this. Some of her Yorkshire friends found out that this can't be true. But I have my doubt. I'm sure Anne Walker had her doubts as well, but I think Anne Lister never gave her the truth. But so Anne Walker felt not really loved. Anne Walker realized it's my money that Anne Lister wants. And Anne Walker also had some religious scruples. She read her Bible and she found that sodomy, meaning homosexuality between men, was a deadly sin in the Bible. And there is in the New Testament, in Paul's epistle to the Romans, there is this one sentence that also women who love women should be condemned. So Anne Walker, who knew her Bible, really had religious scruples about her relationship with Anne Lister. But still, she was not able to divorce her or to go away. And in the end, she always did what Anne Lister wanted her to do. And so in summer 1839, they embarked on a very big journey. This is Anne Lister in black, from which Anne Lister should not return. As I told you, in 1833 it had already been Anne Lister's biggest wish to travel to Russia, but she had to postpone this. Now, 6 years later, in 1839, she again wanted to go to Russia together with Anne Walker. And they traveled in their own carriage with rented horses. So from post station to post station, you rented new horses, but they had their own carriage and big luggage, because they meant to be away at least for 2 years. They travelled from Halifax in Yorkshire, through England, via the Channel, to Belgium, through Germany, up to Denmark, Copenhagen, then to Sweden. They came to Oslo. They wanted to see the fjords, but it was raining so hard, they said, we won't see them. So they gave up the fjords. They passed all through Sweden, and with their carriage on a steamer, they went to Finland, down all the coast from the Finnish coast to St. Petersburg, where they were in October, 1839, and then finally Moscow. They wintered in Moscow. They stayed a couple of months, and they had very bad times with each other because Anne Walker had enough from traveling. And she had enough from Anne Lister flirting with a Russian princess. So for a couple of weeks they did not speak. They were not on speaking terms. But Anne Lister, as I got to know her in her diaries as well as her letters, she was a rhetorically a very good, she was a talker. She could talk you out of everything or into everything what she wanted. And so finally Anne Walker gave up her reluctance that they returned from Moscow back home. No, they went even further. It was a strange winter, this winter of 1839 and 1840, because the cold came very late and snow. So they spent more time in Moscow than they wanted, but finally beginning February it was cold enough and there was snow enough that they could leave their big carriage in Moscow for the time when they would return in maybe a year or longer. And they bought two light Russian carriages called kibitka, and with them they traveled to eastbound to Nizhny Novgorod, where they met the frozen Volga, and there they set these two kibitkas on sleighs and traveled down the frozen Volga till Astrakhan. They were accompanied by 4 servants, so all the time they had help, but it must have been a travel through frozen hell. And Lister was a very curious person, and she, when traveling, she always preferred the seat next to the man driving it, so that she had the full view. In this Russian winter, it was impossible to sit outside. So she had to sit inside with Anne Walker, but she smashed the window in order to see better the landscape, so that she got an impression where they were. Poor Anne Walker was freezing like hell, and she spent these weeks on the frozen Volga, literally covered like that, while Anne Lister was watching out the window. So in Astrakhan, they put the sledges away and were on wheels again and made their way to the Caucasus. Via Vladikavkaz, they finally reached Georgia. They went on the Georgian military road, and the first thing they saw and met was Stepantsminda. They did not see Mount Kaspegi because it was clouded. These days they had seen it already from Vladikavkaz, but on the day they arrived in Stepantsminda, the famous mountain was covered in clouds. But she inspected the little village. Singular town, this. First instance we have seen of the quite flat, walk-like roof of the east. 4 or 5 little round openings are chimneys for the second story. The ground story has loopholes back and front, which let out the smoke and give all the light there is. The people never wash, terribly dirty. So this is her first impression of Georgia. She was a snob, obviously. She was a snob wherever she went, and so she was no other person when she was in Georgia. they spent 6 days passing the famous pass. Please give me the name in Georgian. Well, the pass on the Georgian military road. It took them 6 days. For the highest point, they had to hire 17 peasants from the village of Kobi to help them over the still snowy pass. And sorry? Yes, there. But the name of the pass. Yes. And they needed more horses and men and horsepower. When they survived passing this pass, they... Sorry?
Discussion about the name.
Oh, about the name. Doesn't matter. You know where we are on the landscape. So in Pasanawuri, there was no snow any longer, and they could send back these 17 peasants back to Kobi. And Lister wanted to go straight to Tbilisi, but she hated the man at the post station who made her hire the 6 horses which were recommended in winter time, compared to the 4 horses you needed in summertime from Pasanawuri from on. So hating this additional money she had to spend, she wanted to turn it into speed and made the carriage speed so much that with these 6 horses that they lost a wheel. And instead of being as soon as possible in Tbilisi, they had to spend a day in Dusheti to repair their carriage and the wheel. But in Dusheti, they had the next very interesting encounter with Georgians, because Anne Lister for the first time saw an apartment under the surface, under the soil. Is there a special word for this? So it was a house where you could not see that there is a house because it was because it was dig into the ground. Went into 2 of the huts, sunk about 4 feet in the ground. The square of heavy beams that support the hillocky roof generally rest upon the ground. 5 women, their chemises open so as to show their flabby pendant breasts and great part of stomach, curiously examined our clothes, admired Anne's green silk wadded bonnet lined with pink. So I find this is a lovely scene, how these English women encountered Georgian women, and both parties really looked very curiously at each other. So finally they arrived in Tbilisi, and they were quite exhausted after this long journey, which had begun 10 months ago, and the final 2 months were this winter journey on the frozen Volga. And they needed 4 weeks to recover. They had letters of recommendation from friends they had made in Moscow, which helped them a lot here. Because they went straight to the governor, General Golovin. I learned that Rustaveli Avenue was first called Golovin Boulevard. It was this Golovin they encountered and they had letters of recommendation for. And he, and especially his wife, helped them a lot. Because, and Lister writes, there is no kind of hotel or public guest house or even restaurant where you could go to. But the government had a guest house for foreigners who would come. It was, no one ever had thought of 2 middle-aged English ladies traveling to Tbilisi in these years. I have read other historical books on traveling in these days, all written by men, and they all say, if you do not belong to the military yourself, if you're not an officer, forget traveling there. For passing the Caucasus, they had needed an escort of soldiers with weapons who were willing to defend them in case they should be attacked. There were no hotels, there was no touristic infrastructure whatsoever. So it was a very daring thing for these English ladies to come at all. And I imagine that they were looked at, like in this Dusheti earth hut, like a miracle from another continent, from another world. But with these letters of recommendation, Anne Lister and Anne Walker soon found entrance into high society of Georgia. They met, for example, two princesses Dadiani. One turned out to be Ekaterina, the later famous one, the Queen of Mingrelia, which was then only 24 years old and just married. But she invited the two English ladies to visit them in their palace at Zugdidi, which they later did, but not now. The Golovins and other noble Georgian family really pampered Anne Lister and Anne Walker. They sent them cooked meals. They took them for excursions. They invited them to dinner to their homes. So they really had a very good time in Tbilisi. And Lister remembered the town like the town, interesting and picturesque as ever, never tire of it. Our favorite place, Dalmeidan, and this is a question to you, which place this was, full and busy as usual. Never tire of the picture of Tiflis, though there is not a tree to be seen except at and in the gardens of the town. And Lister's dream was it to reach Persia and even Baghdad. But people, sensible people in Tbilisi talked her out of this. They said, after Tabriz, there are no carriages any longer and you have to ride on muleback to reach Tehran, and this means you have to wear men's clothes. If you are happy to reach Tehran, then you have to wait for a caravan that goes to Baghdad. And if you are happy to reach Baghdad via caravan, it might take you another year waiting to get a caravan back to Tehran. So even Anne Lister, who was used to get her will and do what she wanted, she had to give in that Persia was not reachable for her. So she decided she wanted to see Baku and Azerbaijan. She had a next big quarrel with Anne Walker because she wanted to stay in Tbilisi and said no step further. But again, Anne Lister talked her out of this, and for 3 weeks they made a vacation to Azerbaijan and Baku, which actually both women liked a lot. In Baku they even went to see a harem, and they amused themselves there a lot. Tbilisi, I learned, had not such a thing, at least not one where these two English ladies were invited to see. Next thing they wanted to see, to reach the Black Sea coast. It took them 3 more weeks in Tbilisi to get the equipment for a tour that would finally lead them to the Black Sea, but in between they wanted to tour the valleys and the mountains of the Great Caucasus. From when they finally had arranged everything, They needed, for example, many letters for all the post stations where they would get a bed for the night, free of charge, interesting enough. They only had to pay for the horses, and where, when in need, they would get some soldiers who would escort them with their weapons. So when they had arranged all this, they finally traveled direction Kutaisi. They stayed in Gora and visited Usplisiche. Did I pronounce it right? Or did you understand what they visited? Okay. As well as the lovely church in Didi Ateni. And then they went over the Sorami Pass, which they admired a lot. The whole of this stage, very beautiful. One of the most beautiful drives I have ever taken in my life. Deep rock gorge, the road often a corniche cut out of the rock, and the narrow river filling the whole of the bottom. All sides beautifully wooded, beech, aspens, and so on. In the last 3 weeks, I have traced and listed steps, and so I was also passing this Sorami Pass, and I was also deeply impressed because we picnicked at a place where there was really blossoming rhododendron on the bottom in thick wood. This is was a completely new sight to me. We have imported rhododendrons in our parks, and they grow, and I have even one in my garden, but not as weed next to the way and in a wood. So I understand why she was deeply impressed. They finally reached Kutaisi, which Anne Walker liked a lot. She said the other morning she had not felt so well for years. The climate not too hot for her. She liked Kutaisi very much. I can't say I like the climate too hot and moist, too thickly wooded, but very beautiful and interesting in the highest degree to the traveler. Up until there, from Halifax on, up until to Kutaisi, these both women always had stayed on the main road where there were post stations and where there were horses to hire and where there was more or less a kind of infrastructure to travel. But now they embarked on a really adventurous 4-week holiday on horseback through the Ratcha-Lechkhumi. They hired additional men, and additional horses, and with the 2 women, 4 men, and 8 horses altogether, they did this kind of camping tour beyond the proper road. Really, they went, so to say, into the woods. From Kutaisi, they went to the monasteries of Mozzameta and Gelati, then to Ambro Lavuri and to Oni. Oni was their base camp, so to say. From Oni on, they made several trips which took them 2 to 5 days to explore even further. They, on one trip, they went from Oni to Utsera, to the village of Rebi, and up until the source of the Rioni, which they found next to the glacier. When they went back to Oni from that tour, Anne Lister had the horrible thing to do, to wash her own clothing for the very first time in her life. She was 48-year-old, and now in Oni, she for the first time in her life had to make some female work. In Oni there was Market Day, which they liked a lot. and Lister writes, amusing assemblage of mountaineers. Some of the women were afraid when we touched their things. For a largish grey horse, the man asked 40 rubles silver. Nonsense, said I, and walked off. On this market, they also met two princes who were sauntering up and down the bazaar. I know them now from the rest. Dirty and ordinary as they seemed to us, they looked, when mingled with their serfs, high above the all. Again, the snob she was. In Oni, they got the best house they encountered in all of Ratcha-Lechkhumi, the only house which was constructed from stone. Usually they had to sleep in very modest accommodations, and when there was nothing, they even drove people out of their houses. So when they reached the tiny village Dronoriza, which I have not discovered, late in the night and in pouring rain, she knocked at the first house. No possibility of staying there, full of people ill in the hot fever, as she calls it. The 2 or 3 that came to the door, pale as ghosts. Rode further into the village. About 9:45 before we got quarters in a good cottage with 6 women and 3 men and 3 or 4 children, boys and girls. The children were roused to give us their corner, and there we spread our burqas and saddle blankets and made ourselves comfortable, all our baggage around us. Fire in the middle, boiled our kettle and eggs, and baked our flat cake, that means bread, in the ashes. The rain pelted hard and thunder rolled and lightning flashed, and we were satisfied to be so well housed. Our wet cloaks hung on the rails suspended from the roofs. Next morning, fresh round bread and plenty of milk for our breakfast. Gave the woman of the house half silver ruble, for which she kissed my hand, bowed low and seemed very thankful. The lower they bent, the greater the respect. When traveling like this, the 2 women always met the patriarch of the house, who was their host, and they quite were sad about almost never meeting the women of the house. But when they met some women, again, and Lister the snob wrote very curiously about them. So at one place, they had a talk with the ladies of the house. The ladies, all well enough dressed à la Georgienne, and evidently much pleased at our visit. The wife, not the handsomest, but the most talkative and intelligent. All wore the white thing that, when pulled up, covers the mouth, but all came to us uncovered, except one. And she uncovered at my request, and they all laughed. Thanked them for their good hospitality and shook hands at coming away. Shaking hands with somebody was so condescending for Anne Lister, she always had to remark it. She would not shake hands with me, for example. At another house, she raised the curiosity of the hostess, and she talked with her in the evening, and next morning there was another curious encounter, because when Anne Lister was dressing, she realized that she was watched by that woman. So this hostess watched me dressing through the little lattice close above where I slept. hung up my cloak against her, pretending not to see her. So not only Halifax society found Anne Lister quite peculiar, also Georgian society found them special. Anne Lister wanted to reach Zugdidi via this tour through the Ratcha-Lechkhumi and then continuing through Lower Swanisha to Higher Swanisha, reach Ushkuli and Mestia, and then go down the road to Zugdidi. I learned that also today this is a very daring thing to do, and they could not manage. The horses became lame, as did the men who were assisting the two women. And so there, after 4 weeks in the bushes, there was kind of a revolt. And no one except Anne Lister wanted to go further. So Anne Lister had to give in, and they went all back to Kutaisi. And there they left some of their men, and only Anne Lister and Anne Walker, together with 2 men and on 4 horses, they went the broad sandy road in the not in the mountains but in the one which you take today also in the plains, to Zugdidi, where they had been invited by young Ekaterina Dadiani and her husband David, which just in this year, in 1840, had become the ruling prince of Mingrelia. They came from a camping tour, as you remember, and so they were quite dirty, and the Dadianis were very tactful and gave them the opportunity to make them presentable before they presented themselves to the prince and princess of Dadiani. So when they arrived, they did not say hello to their hosts, but they were brought to their quarters. They had, at the Dadiani palace, a very good gallery and hall and ante-room, and our room carpeted with Persian carpets. Several main servants in waiting, and 2 nice little chambermaids arranging our 2 comfortable sofas to perfection. Pillows, coverlets, so things they had long missed. Silver ewer and pitcher, large table, little round toilet table, and good looking glass standing on it, 4 chairs and 2 armchairs, luxurious, and 2 wax lights burning. Prince Dadiani had sent us soap, combs and brushes, dressing gowns and nightcaps, very pretty, pomatum, eau de cologne, luxurious wash and flea hunt brought with us in our clothes last night, and not bit at all. They brought tea and excellent bread and fresh butter, and we enjoyed ourselves. Then offered supper, but impossible to eat more. Have not had so comfortable a bed and room since leaving Moscow. So they had a wonderful night and made them presentable, and only after having breakfast next morning and after having had their hair done by maidservants, they met their hosts. But Ekaterina Dadiani was sick, as was her baby daughter. She was married for 1.5 years or so and had given birth to her first child, who was so sick that Ekaterina had asked, as Anne Lister says, German doctor from Kutaisi for help and assistance. But not only the baby was ill, Ekaterina herself looked yellowish and sick and could not spend every meal together with their guests because she had to lay down. There were other guests, like as Anne Lister calls him, a German botanist who was so ill that they did not meet him at all. So Anne Lister and Walker, after refreshing themselves, had the impression that this is not a good place to stay right at the moment. Everybody is ill. The children especially, and the men and women, look pale and yellow and unhealthy in this moist, hot bottom. It is the climate that so disagrees with the little Dadiani daughter, a fine little child. I advised the princess to change air, and so did Anne Lister and Walker. They stayed only 2 days at the Dadiani Palace and left already on August 12th. In the afternoon, which is quite peculiar because usually they would get up very, very early with the light and use the cool hours of the days and ride till noon and then have a 5 hours stop somewhere and then again make some kilometers in the evening. So that they left that luxurious palace in the afternoon is for me a strong sign that they really felt uncomfortable there. So, and they spent that next night in very poor conditions, again with such a farmer's house like the example I have read to you before, where they drove away the people from their beds, if they had any, or their place. And on August 13, they passed the village of Jevari on the Nguri, and then again a village called Sachina, and at the village named Jakali on August 13th. This is the last entry Anne Lister ever made in her diary. She, as usual, she described the day, and then she says, arrived at Jakali at 6:5 daytime, 2 cottages. Arrange ourselves in the Indian corn bar, a little wicker place, perhaps 4.5 by 3 yards. Spread our burqas on straw, and now, at 8:25, I have just written the last 19 lines. High hills north and within, ridges of wooded hills rising every now and then into little wooded conical summits. Tea, etc., now at 8:25. Laid down at 9:15. These are the last words Anne Lister ever has written in her diary. 5 weeks later, she was dead. She died on September 22nd, 1840, as it is said, in or around Kutaisi, and some sources say of a hot fever, whatever that was. Another researcher says it might have been the plague. I think that cholera or typhus are more probable, but we don't know. From now on, there is only speculation left because the main source, Anne Lister diary, is mute, and Anne Walker has not written and has never talked about what then happened. So we might assume next morning, August 14th, Anne Lister might have felt a bit uneasy, but wanted to go on because she wanted to go on. Anne Lister wrote everything of her life in minute detail. Whenever she was sick before, she would have written about it. So she does not mention feeling not well at all. So this illness must have literally knocked her off her feet next morning or during the next day or next evening, so that she could not write any longer. We don't know how long they continued. With her strong will, it could be that they rode for 1 or 2 or even 3 days, and Ann Lister saying, no, I will be better, and Walker always wanting to go home. But then finally Ann Lister could not refuse anything any longer because she was too ill to do anything. So Ann Walker tried to bring him back, and I imagine, but this is pure speculation, that she thought of Zugdidi Palace, which was the most civilized place she could find in that region, but it might be there that Ann Lister caught that illness which led to her death. So Ann Walker will have felt, well, what should I do? Should I bring her there? Maybe get sick myself? Is there still that ominous German doctor to help? We don't know. Obviously she tried to bring her back to Kutaisi, but we don't know whether Ann Lister reached Kutaisi living and died there, or died on the road. This is open to speculation. From Kutaisi, Ann Walker could write a letter back to Halifax, which reached Halifax surprisingly quickly in that year. So end of 1840, Halifax knew that Ann Lister died on that adventurous journey. And Ann Walker had that gruesome task to bring the body back. I assume that it was Ann Lister, when she felt she was dying, who asked Ann Walker to bury her at home, because she had that strong feeling of a noble woman who wanted to be buried in the family vault where her body belonged. And Ann Lister did that loving duty for her, and she brought all the luggage and the coffin back to Tbilisi via the Georgian military road, again to Moscow, where she buried the body for an intermediate time, and then again back home to Halifax, where she buried her life partner Ann Lister in April 1841. She herself, Ann Walker, was only 2 years later declared insane. Ann Lister always said Ann Walker was a frail character. I don't really see it. We always watch to Ann Walker through the filter of Ann Lister's diary, but she had the strength, for example, to travel back, to survive this journey and come home healthy, in health, and bring even a body back, which is really a horrible task to do so. But also Ann Walker's family, her sister and her brother-in-law, wanted to have Ann Walker's money. And I assume she had quite maybe not a nervous breakdown, but she was touched by this horrible experience of this long journey, and then her partner dying and bringing the body back. So that it was easy for a mean family to declare this frail woman too nervous to live on her own. And they put her into an asylum for the mentally ill, and they took her money, and they took Shipton Hall, because Ann Walker had inherited Shipton Hall, where she lived on her own for the 2 years without Ann Lister, up until she was sent to an asylum for the mentally ill. And so a couple of years later, Ann Walker died impoverished. And this is the sad ending of my story. And I hope to have raised some questions and contributions on your part. At the end of my handout, I have written you some of my open research questions, and maybe you have some answers for me, and we go on talking.